you so much, Elin, and don't miss the chance to participate in this contest and win the nice prize for the most creative reels. Just use the hashtag ReelsAWLD. I'm so curious to see what you create, and who knows, I just might make my own contribution. Liv and Carolyn, they spoke about superheroes before, and our keynote speaker today, she is a true superhero. She is one of the most important voices of our time when it comes to fight against racism, discrimination, and injustice in society. And today she will talk about how to lead with inclusivity in mind. Please welcome the award-winning activist, Lovette Jallow.
Thank you so much for that introduction. So I won't have to repeat my name. I was invited today to be a keynote speaker for this agency, Women in Leadership Day, to bring forth and speak on equality and inclusion. To talk about what we can do in order for women to be able to thrive both in life and in business, and also to offer tools from my end. And I decided last minute to speak on the experiences that are most often than not missed, namely a Black woman's perspective and the difficulties we face in thriving, both in business and in life, despite belonging to the umbrella of womanhood. I will start with an anecdote. A year ago, a company, a very well-known company in Sweden, contacted me. They were hosting an award show where they celebrate women, power women to be exact. And I was one of the nominees. Now that meant I got to visit their company, I got to meet their leaders, I got to see how they work. And they even boasted with having a 70% female-led task force. That was one of their most important selling points. Now they spent almost an hour introducing me, showing me the ways in which they work. I also got the opportunity to meet their diversity and inclusion team. And I think at the end of that meeting, I was expected to be wowed. I was expected to be excited and impressed. Instead, being an autistic Black woman, I decided to ask the difficult questions that probably put their entire company image on its head. I asked them how, in a country like Sweden, where 33% of our population have one or both parents born outside of the country, a country where out of the 10 million people that live here and contribute, 19% of us are visibly minorities, and 400,000 look like me, Black. I asked them, in such an amazing country like Sweden, with a demographic that looks the way it does, how come their female-led workforce had less than 1% visible minorities? They were silent. Perhaps they were trying to remember the heritage of the cleaner. Perhaps they were thinking, oh, the brunette who works as a secretary looks like a POC. Could be, but couldn't be sure. One thing was certain. They realized that in all their efforts for diversity, they had actually only focused on one aspect of womanhood. Their diversity started and ended with women that looked like them. They realized the hypocrisy that comes with the so-called gender equality. And I wish I could say they were an anomaly in the Nordics. They are the norm, not an anomaly. Many companies and startups boast often of being gender equal, and in some cases even exceed that quota. But when you look close enough, beyond that flashy surface, you will have the understanding that that's not truly what they stand for or understand. Because the we must have an understanding that woman does not automatically cover all the bases of equality. You will see, if you look hard enough, that black and brown women are often left out of these conversations, because somehow we believe that black and brown women belong to the political and social side of equality. And many also tend to make the argument this is due to this group of women that I belong to proudly lack the relevant degrees and experiences, and that's why we're missing in action. But the truth is, when you look at the Nordics, when you look at Europe in its entirety, America and England, black women are one of the most educated minority groups that exist. This is backed by studies. And more studies are coming out only this year, showing you that women in various industries face not only bullying, but high degrees of discrimination as they enter and climb their careers. The perpetrators of these discriminations, though, are not always men. They can also take the form of our allies and white women specifically. And according to the National Center for Educational Statistics in the United States, they also confirm that the most educated demographic in America are black women. But our degrees do not align with the financial rewards that ought to come with our high level of education and degrees. When you look at startups for women-owned businesses, they grew between 2007 and 2018 by 58%. And for black women, our startups grew by 164%. But when you look at the investments and the seed money startup companies get, black women receive more than 90% less than our white counterparts. And when we enter positions in the workforce, we're also earning much less than other female counterparts doing the exact same job. Now, apart from these challenges, which are backed by statistics and facts, by science, by numbers, we have the emotional challenges of being black in the workforce as well. From how you wear your hair to be considered professional, to how you speak, how softly your voice must be, so you're not seen as the aggressive, angry black woman. To have to change your last name. There are grievous microaggressions that black women have to go through in the workforce, despite being well overqualified to being there. And what are microaggressions, some of you are thinking? Because it's quite new to the Nordics, Scandinavia. What are microaggressions? They sound so cute, so small, but they're not. They cause a lot of harm. Microaggressions are defined as everyday, subtle, and many times unintentional interactions and behaviors that communicate bias towards marginalized groups. It can be as simple as asking your black colleague, how come they speak so English so well, or Swedish so well, or Finnish so well? It's asking your black colleague where you're from. And when they say a local town in your country, you say, ha, no, really, where are you from? It's feeling entitled to walk up to your black colleague and touch their hair because you're confused as to how their hair can defy gravity. So, these microaggressions take a mental and emotional toll on black women in the workforce. You cannot show up to work as your authentic self because you're always adapting to a white dominant workplace. And I speak on this as, well, last time I checked anyway, as an educated black woman with my degrees who has worked in the corporate industry for over 15 years. I've even written a book on these exact microaggressions that we have to navigate, that are invisible to the rest of you, but we feel it with all its might. I have entered my career as a property lawyer. I have climbed that ladder. I've ended up in a directorial position. And I can tell you in those 15 years, in every single workplace, whether it be England, whether it be Denmark, or whether it be Sweden, microaggressions were part of my day. And anytime you bring it up, the perpetrator always says, "Oh, I didn't mean it that way. That wasn't my intent." But the impact is felt within. These microaggressions led me, a high-flying property lawyer in the corporate industry, to make the final decision to leave my employment and to be self-employed, albeit successfully, but I could not handle having to mask who I am daily in that workplace. Now, this is also backed by facts. When you see a company that has a very high turnover of persons of color and Black people, most likely than not, they have focused on diversity but have zero understanding on inclusion. Because diversity is being invited in. Inclusion is being able to feel comfortable enough to make changes and motivated enough. Whilst a company, when I go in as a consultant, leadership rarely understands why does it happen? Why are people magically leaving the company when they are our diversity token? And they don't understand that when you dismantle structures and obstacles to equality for all women, you also have to be ready to dismantle the structures that you benefit from but that harm every other woman. It would be when I walk into a company and they introduce me to their diversity room, and I walk in and I see Kalle, Anders, Ann-Sofie, Annika. It always makes me wonder, how can this be the diversity team when they have so many blind spots when it comes to diversity? It would be as ridiculous as having a room full of men making decisions that will impact women's bodies. And history has taught us that. History has taught us the benefits of having the right people in these rooms to be able to reach everyone. For Black women, anywhere in the world, from the Nordics all the way to the Americas and Asias, we have to navigate identities very people understand or even wish to understand. These identities are one of the reasons we are so often forgotten when we speak of the umbrella of womanhood and its solidarity. We are women, and we face all the challenges women face globally due to sexism and patriarchy. But we also have extra challenges that our skin color causes in others, such as racism. Our identities are at an intersection, a term that has been alive for over 30 years, coined by Kimberly Crenshaw. It means if you consider yourself a feminist, if you consider yourself an advocate for equality, for women's rights, then you have to understand that women's identities overlap each other. And these identities are rooted in race, religion, rooted in ethnicity, sexual orientation, just to name a few. These identities will determine and impact the way we experience oppression and discrimination. A woman who is white will face oppression based on her gender, but will still have the advantage of race. A Black woman like myself, I'll be disadvantaged because of my gender, for I am woman. Disadvantaged because of my skin color, for I am Black. But also even disadvantaged for being Muslim due to Islamophobia. These are disadvantages neither Black men nor white women will have to go through, nor understand. But understanding intersectionality makes those in power, and this is one of the reasons why it's so hard to get this message across. Intersectionality is uncomfortable. It makes those people in power with privileges very, very uncomfortable. Why? Because then they have to face their privileges. They also have to see all the ways that they oppress and make changes with concerted effort. But when we think about it, does it even affect all of society, really? Does it matter? Inclusion, diversity, intersectionality? I think it makes perfect sense that when we have spoken of gender equality for so long right now, in fact, Sweden's one of the leading countries in that arena, it makes sense because half of the population identify as women. It makes sense to prioritize that gender equality work. But society loses if we as women only have the capacity to focus on one singular identity of gender. In doing that, we will never be able to solve the broader issues of systemic oppression. If we only focus on womanhood as our common denominator, without understanding how systems of oppressions work with each other, then that means we're admitting that we're happy to only work for one certain group in society. And that's the group that's already far ahead due to their race, because they don't have the burdens of identity, like some of us. It's a baggage. In Sweden, when you look at it, for women who are part of the 19% of visible minorities, you're also telling us that you can only focus on one of our identities. The part of us that you are most comfortable with. And the part that you can identify with. And many of us, I can't speak for everyone, but I can speak for myself. Many of us cannot shed our identities. I can't answer if I'm a black woman first, if I'm black or a woman first. Let's put it that way. Because when I enter a room, both parts of me are visible and judged and can cause me harm. If it was so easy to just pick up a knife and cut away the part of me that cannot enter womanhood, we wouldn't have a problem. But as you can tell, I'm one full person, and I don't like knives. Diversity and inclusion, as we have known it for far too long, has been and is one-dimensional. To ask human beings, any human being, to leave one or more of their identities outside the workplace entrance is unfair and inhuman. And it says more about you than it does about us, because you're telling us you can only focus on one thing at a time. And if it isn't something that you can empathize with, it has to be left out. And that's not how society works. Now, what are the solutions, you may ask? Well, as dreary as reality is, I always like to leave my audience on a positive note, as positive as I can. We get to the final part of talking, what are the solutions? How do we solve this problem? Everybody wants to solve it. And now we're at a critical point where we have seen what has happened this spring. Yes, 2020 has been a difficult year for all of us. But for some of us, 2020 did not start in January. We have been battling the many different facets of our identities and trying to thrive despite all the obstacles in our way. So, as they say, there are different levels in hell. Well, first solution is listen and learn from Black women and women of color. Understand our views as much as we have to understand your views. Educate yourself, because that is your responsibility alone. And I say this because once people hear me speak, their first directive is to go find the only Black person working in the company to ask them to explain. That's not their job. That's called a double emotional tax. They're there to do a job, and you're asking them to do another of educating you. Make space. Analyze the spaces that you occupy. Look at your networking connections, workspaces, and mentorship programs. Instead of speaking on behalf of us, because we're not included in these spaces, try and figure out how much space you can make. Don't speak for us and pass the mic. Accept criticism, because this journey is going to be riddled with mistakes. You need to be able to take feedback when someone calls you out on your behavior with humility and empathy. My final solution is get rid of that idea that Black women need your sympathy. We are educated, we're capable, we're brilliant. At best, we ask for your empathy, which is very different from your sympathy. Sympathy is, poor you, I pity you. I feel bad for you. Empathy is, I may never know the obstacles that you face as a Black woman, but I'm prepared to learn and not be one of those obstacles. And with that idea and with those thoughts, we can move forward together as one in solidarity and in womanhood. So thank you very much for having me today.
So much, Lovette Jallow.